My parents subjected me to humiliation at my sister's graduation ceremony. They quipped that I was an anomaly compared to my flawless sister, so I delivered a shocking revelation of my own. At my sister's graduation, I experienced profound shame, not for myself, but for my own parents. They disparaged me in the presence of everyone, including our closest friends and relatives. This occasion was supposed to be exclusively about Elena, my elder sister. She was enthusiastic about embarking on her new trajectory, having recently graduated from university and secured a prestigious position. When my parents rose to deliver a speech in her honor, I anticipated they would offer appropriate commendations. She has diligently striven to achieve this milestone and merits all the recognition. I was not taken aback when, during their address, they characterized Elena as one of their greatest blessings. I was sufficiently mature by then to acknowledge that my parents cherished Elena more deeply than they loved me. She had consistently been the more accomplished daughter, and my parents would perpetually draw comparisons between us. Then, my parents proceeded to jest in their speech about how they should have ceased procreation after Elena. They posited that second-born children are typically unproductive. They asserted that if they had only Elena in their lives, they could have devoted more time and energy to her, instead of me. Hearing them utter such appalling sentiments openly and casually while I was seated directly there stunned me. I scanned the room, hoping that someone, anyone, would perceive the disturbing nature of their pronouncements. But all I observed were the visages of my relatives, guffawing along as if this dreadful analogy were merely light-hearted amusement. Though my parents had frequently made me feel inadequate and inconsequential, this marked the first instance where they had done so publicly, leaving no opportunity for me to conceal the reality. In their estimation, I simply paled in comparison to their exemplary daughter, Elena. This was not an isolated occurrence or a momentary lapse in judgment. It reinforced what I had long suspected. I was regarded as a distant afterthought, whereas my elder sister would perpetually be the daughter they adored. Growing up as the second child, I became accustomed to our household's implicit bias. It insidiously permeated their discourse, conduct, and routines. My parents frequently neglected to extend birthday felicitations to me, and on more than one occasion, they were absent on business excursions, leaving me solitary. They would never overlook Elena's special occasion. Every year, without exception, both of my parents would be present, orchestrating a lavish celebration and ensuring Mom felt cherished. Witnessing the manner in which they lavished her with affection on her special day taught me early on to temper my expectations and accept that my birthday held little significance for them. As an opinionated youngster, my parents regularly informed me that I was disruptive or disagreeable simply by virtue of my inherent nature. I was branded problematic because I did not conform to the subdued, restrained archetype they appeared to favor, and I was penalized for something as innocuous as being excessively loquacious or candid in expressing my passions. Elena's placid temperament and introverted proclivities, conversely, were perpetually extolled within our family. She was esteemed as the quintessential daughter, embodying maturity and politeness. She was, consequently, the one who was showcased and exhibited before everyone. Over the years, I was the recipient of the preponderance of criticism. I endeavored for a time to align with the image my parents seemed to desire. I exerted effort, believing that if I behaved more appropriately, achieved more, or adhered to their blueprint, they would eventually perceive me differently. But as I matured, it became evident that I could not simply mold myself into Elena's replica. We were two distinct individuals. I exerted considerable effort, but I could not become her. I eventually relinquished that pursuit and attempted to adapt to their incessant adulation of her. the manner in which they would boast about her accomplishments to anyone who would lend an ear, while simultaneously dismissing everything I had ever achieved, still inflicted profound pain. All of those occurrences, as devastating as they were, had at least remained confined within our domestic sphere. I was astounded by the nonchalance with which they divulged everything at the graduation ceremony. All those instances, as painful as they had been, had at least stayed inside the family. I was shocked by how casually my parents disgraced me when they gave their speech at Elena's graduation. My parents had never previously humiliated me before other individuals. They had thus never revealed to our extended family how limited their respect was toward me. Even more hurtful the fact that nobody from the whole family even seemed to notice or point out how wrong all this was. No one so much gave me a pitiful look when my parents openly joked at my expense. My parents continued to laud Elena, their tones conveying a sense of pride that I had never witnessed directed towards me. Then, they audaciously announced that they had procured her a graduation present, a brand new automobile which she had perpetually aspired to acquire. With everyone's attention fixated on Elena, who embraced my parents with affection and gratitude, the room erupted in applause, laughter, and clapping. The three of them appeared genuinely joyful. I felt like an interloper within my own family. The ironic aspect is that I have never harbored envy towards Elena. We had always maintained a reasonably amicable relationship, and I believed she deserved whatever positive fortune befell her. But that speech shattered me. The truth is that following that appalling speech, I confronted my parents. For years, I had silently endured their favoritism, disdain, and unpleasant pronouncements. I absorbed it all, persuading myself that if I simply endeavored to remain resilient and composed, rather than agitated, circumstances would improve. But that evening, following the speech and their jests in front of everyone, I had reached a breaking point. I was weary of enduring everything and pretending that their remarks no longer caused pain. I thus determined that I could no longer remain reticent. I mustered the courage to vocalize my feelings, hoping that my parents would perceive the depth of the wound their actions had inflicted. I desired them to, at the very least, demonstrate that they cared sufficiently to listen to me. I yearned for them to acknowledge the anguish they had engendered over the years and recognize the humiliation I felt at that moment. If I articulated my sentiments, I reasoned, they might regret their utterances, or at the very least, feel remorse for making me feel so insignificant. When I ultimately confronted them, I received a frigid, disdainful response. They paid scant attention to my words. Rather than offering contrition or an apology, they accused me of exaggerating, as though years of being ignored and denigrated could be so readily dismissed. They behaved as though I possessed no right to be incensed with them, or as if my emotions were inconsequential. My father went so far as to remark that he possessed nothing to be proud of concerning me, and that I should not hold it against them if they were disillusioned with my identity. I recall the nonchalance with which he articulated it, as though my existence held no significance for him. My mother, conversely, instructed me to cease overreacting and emphasized that I was being excessively needy by becoming distressed over something so trivial. It felt as though my parents were conveying that I had not earned the fundamental respect of being their offspring because I had not accomplished enough, that I was somehow less deserving of their pride or solicitude than Elena, simply because I was not her. The matter even escalated to Elena, who defended my parents and, predictably, demanded that I be less severe with them. She uttered something that truly resonated with me, and I shall never forget it. I should not have been so incensed by their graduation speech because it was merely an innocuous jest. Elena assured me that if I had studied and labored diligently, as she had, I could engender their pride as well. Among all the pronouncements, those resonated most profoundly. It was dreadful to learn I hadn't exerted sufficient effort to merit their esteem. She made it sound so facile, as though all the years of striving I had invested were invisible to her, as if my challenges and endeavors to secure employment held no relevance. As the elder sister, I anticipated that she would offer some form of protection, but she did not. That felt like a betrayal emanating from her. Reflecting upon that conversation, it altered my perspective. I realized then that I had relinquished my family, ceased striving to gain their approval, ceased offering them explanations, and ceased hoping for something that would never materialize, love or affirmation. I channeled all my efforts into creating something for myself, commencing that very day. I immersed myself in my academic pursuits, concentrating on the aspects I could influence and shape my destiny. 2 years later, all my arduous labor bore fruit when I was accepted, on a full scholarship, to my dream institution. This constituted a personal triumph for me. This was entirely my own accomplishment, the culmination of my dedication, determination, and refusal to allow my family's neglect to define me. After attaining that objective, it appeared for the first time that I had achieved something truly significant. When I imparted the news to my parents, they were almost astonished, as though they had never anticipated that I would attend university, let alone on a scholarship. Elena scrutinized my acceptance letter twice, as though she doubted my capacity to accomplish things independently. Clearly, they had all underestimated me, and witnessing their astonishment instilled in me a subtle thrill. I simply shook my head at her remark, but my mother then soured my disposition by stating that it was fortunate I had received a full scholarship, as they had not allocated any funds for my tertiary education. My parents had no qualms about financing Elena's tuition, notwithstanding their lack of foresight and provision for me. When the time arrived to relocate, I simply packed my possessions and departed from the house for my university accommodation. That day, I made a resolute decision to sever all communication with Elena and my parents. I perceived no necessity to elucidate my intentions. They had, after all, consistently demonstrated that my sentiments, perspectives, and values held scant influence over them. Why should I exhaust myself attempting to explain something they had proven incapable of acknowledging? Since they had not even proffered an apology that might atone for the years of neglect and agony they had inflicted, I recognized that engaging in further discourse with them was futile. My family contacted me frequently over the ensuing weeks and months, dispatching emails and messages in the faint hope that they had reconsidered their actions and were reaching out to make amends. I initially felt compelled to peruse them. However, each message served as a poignant reminder of their character. Their communications were replete with attempts to mislead me into believing I was the one behaving erratically. Instead of accepting accountability for the years of emotional distress they had caused, they posited that I had overreacted, dismissing my decision to sever ties as immature and impetuous. Their pronouncements consistently reverted to the underlying verity. I was the one dissolving the family, and therefore I was culpable for severing communication. I never deigned to respond to any of them. Thus far, my university experience has been remarkably positive. I've been able to dedicate my undivided attention to my academic pursuits, avocations, and, most significantly, relationships with individuals who cherish and perceive me for my authentic self. Working part-time at a nearby diner has enabled me to accumulate savings for the future. Encountering new individuals at the diner and engaging in conversations about their lives is intriguing. I've severed ties with my family and immersed myself in my studies, social existence, and immersing myself in all that my new environment had to offer. By saturating my days with meaningful activities, I hadn't missed them or pondered their well-being, even once. Yesterday, I received an unforeseen email from my parents. I found it astonishing. They had ceased corresponding with me long ago, as I had never replied to any of their prior communications. In this email, my parents urged me to contact them promptly as they possessed some distressing news to impart. Despite everything, I felt my chest constrict. Years of anguish and rejection could not obliterate the persistent apprehension that something catastrophic had transpired. My heart commenced racing, and all I could contemplate was the possibility that a family member had sustained a grave injury, or worse, perished. Despite my resolve to maintain a distance, fear infiltrated my heart, pounding as I braced myself for whatever intelligence they were about to convey. I seized my phone, unblocked them, and immediately returned their call. Elena, who was navigating a challenging personal predicament, was the subject of the unsettling news my parents wished to share with me. They disclosed that she had been grappling with substance addiction, which had profoundly impacted her life. They stated that her addiction had deteriorated to such an extent that she had forfeited her employment, depleted her savings, and was now bereft of resources or alternatives. I had no inkling that Elena was enduring anything of this nature, so the revelation completely blindsided me. She had always been my dependable, high-achieving sibling. However, that very sister had succumbed to drug addiction. I found it arduous to accept. Elena's addiction was so implausible in my parents' eyes that it shattered their perception of her. Their incredulity, desperation, and most significantly, their profound apprehension about how this would affect their reputation if others discovered it shocked me. They hoped I might possess some solutions for them, as they recounted everything. Elena had always appeared to be grounded and responsible, so it was startling that she, of all individuals, had fallen victim to something as perilous as heroin addiction. My father then inquired, in a distrustful tone, "You didn't introduce her to narcotics back then, did you?" The implication astonished me. Not only was the notion utterly preposterous, but it was also profoundly repugnant to contemplate that they might surmise I had any involvement in Elena's tribulations, much less anything as grave as introducing her to drugs. How could I possibly introduce narcotics to my elder sister? I mean, I have never personally indulged in drugs. Furthermore, I had not communicated with Elena or the remainder of my family in years due to their mistreatment of me. Having extricated myself from their lives, I had concentrated on forging my own path, distant from their toxicity. In the face of their pristine image of Elena crumbling, they were swift to point fingers at someone else, and I was clearly the most convenient target. I counseled them to converse with Elena before forming any conclusions, and I admonished them for even entertaining suspicions about me. Throughout our conversation, I discerned that my parents were more preoccupied with the ignominy that would befall the family if Elena's admissions became public knowledge, rather than expressing solicitude for her well-being. My mother appeared fixated on her immaculate daughter's clandestine activities. She incessantly reiterated how unforeseen it was to uncover this facet of her personality and how others would react if they ever learned the truth. Elena and Dad were overwhelmed and ill-equipped to address the situation, so my mother implored me to return home so that I could assist them in caring for Elena. My mother beseeched me. I mean, what are we even supposed to do? I feel so ashamed of her. So perhaps you could converse with her on our behalf, as though this were a legitimate entreaty to make after years of non-communication. I cannot assist Elena. She requires professional intervention, I stated bluntly. I emphasized that if they genuinely cared about her welfare and desired to facilitate her recovery, the most efficacious and compassionate course of action would be to admit her to a treatment facility where trained specialists could provide assistance. But my father instantaneously rejected the notion of consigning her to rehabilitation, virtually shuddering at the prospect of their family's esteemed reputation being sullied by her admission to a treatment center. He was obsessed with the potential for their standing to be compromised by dispatching her to such a location. He contended that it would only serve to tarnish their repute. The prospect of individuals becoming cognizant that their only accomplished daughter harbored an affliction as severe as heroin addiction horrified him. My father rebuked me for even contemplating this option, as though openly acknowledging her addiction was more shameful, and as if constant surveillance would magically rectify the problem. Dad insisted that I return home and that the three of us collaborate to care for Elena, subjecting her to perpetual observation to forestall a relapse. He reiterated how profoundly they desired Elena to recuperate and resume her normal life as expeditiously as possible. Their perspective was that everything would revert to normalcy as long as no one else became aware. They desired me to participate in a charade, feigning that all was well while concealing her issues from everyone else. I became incensed and incredulous as I listened. Why were my parents so preoccupied with others' perceptions of them and their reputation? Here was an opportunity for my parents to truly demonstrate integrity, to demonstrate that they could prioritize their daughter's needs over appearances and transform her life. My sister was manifestly suffering from something grave, yet they still struggled to undertake the appropriate course of action. These individuals had not altered significantly. Furthermore, it was evident that they were now attempting to lure me back, urging me to uphold this familial facade by assisting them in caring for the sister they frequently contrasted me with. I asserted that I required some time to deliberate on the matter. I cannot simply abandon everything. After all, I have academic commitments and employment obligations to consider. My parents insisted that I take a minimum of 2 or 3 weeks off to aid them, as they genuinely required my immediate assistance. Concerning everything, I am conflicted. A part of me yearns to ascertain what I can do for Elena to ensure her well-being. Another facet of me is selfish, allowing my parents to manage their golden child entirely independently. I am uncertain whether I can be of substantial assistance, as they are more concerned with preserving appearances than with addressing the underlying issue. Even presently, I contemplate whether I should decline to return home and care for my drug-addicted sister. Update 1. This narrative did not appear poised to garner such widespread attention. It is requiring some time to peruse the hundreds of comments I have received. I desired to clarify a few points. I do not harbor animosity towards Elena. In fact, I aspire to assist her and genuinely care about her. However, as I have not communicated with my family in 3 years, I have experienced a degree of serenity and stability that I did not possess previously. I am apprehensive that reconnecting with Elena may facilitate my parents' re-entry into my life as well. I honestly do not know for certain. If you are curious, Elena could have been battling heroin addiction for years, possibly even before my parents discovered it. Clearly, Elena, the golden child, was lauded and maintained as the ideal daughter, frequently subjected to intense pressure to uphold that image. This form of pedestal minimizes vulnerability and failure. Any failure, regardless of its magnitude, could have been devastating if Elena believed her worth was solely determined by her accomplishments and others' perceptions of her. Drugs could have gradually developed as a coping mechanism for escaping the burden of those expectations or the apprehension of disappointing our parents. I become even more despondent when I contemplate my sister, who may have been suffering silently all along without my awareness. She should have felt comfortable being candid with me earlier, before matters reached this juncture. I would have desired to be present for her, to assist her in navigating through it. It merely instills in me a sense of helplessness. If only I had possessed knowledge of this significant aspect of her life and could have provided support. My parents anticipated the utmost from my sister and me from an early age, as they are both high achievers. Personally, I require some time to analyze everything. I will provide further updates if anything further transpires. Update 2. After considerable introspection and encouragement from some of the comments I perused, I resolved to contact Elena. She is my sister, notwithstanding everything. Consequently, I believed it was imperative to hear from her directly, rather than basing my decisions on my parents' interpretations of events. Initially, I dispatched a brief text message to her, inquiring whether she was amenable to a conversation. She responded several hours later, but only consented to a telephone call. When I finally spoke with her, the voice on the other end of the line seemed like a mere shadow of the sister I knew. Elena's tone was discernibly subdued, softer, and more cautious. She gradually divulged what she was undergoing. Elena stated that she had struggled with addiction for several years. It commenced shortly after her university graduation, when she began employment at her law firm. She struggled to maintain her status at work, consistently exerting more effort than others to impress her supervisor in the hopes of receiving greater recognition or a promotion. She began to experience burnout after being the perfect, highly talented daughter for so long. Elena felt she couldn't pause, decelerate, or seek treatment because she had to live up to the expectations everyone harbored for her. When the stress became unbearable, a friend recommended using recreational drugs to alleviate it. Before she realized it, what began as intermittent use had devolved into dependence. Elena also conveyed that she had felt imprisoned for the longest time. She couldn't confide in her parents about her struggles, as she knew how they would react. She felt isolated due to their obsessive focus on appearances and denial of anything that contradicted their narrative. She maintained the facade, behaving as though everything was satisfactory, even as she began to lose control. She could no longer conceal the reality, and thus she spiraled, forfeited her employment, and depleted her savings. She inquired whether I was judging her as severely as she was judging herself, and she expressed her embarrassment for even discussing this with me. It pained my heart to hear her narrative. I had never realized that the pedestal our parents had placed her upon was a prison rather than a privilege. She had been bearing the suffocating weight of being their golden child, whereas I had been grappling with the anguish of being overlooked. Our parents' focus on control and favoritism had harmed each of us in distinct ways. There was no way I would have judged her. Consequently, I expressed my regret that she had not communicated her sentiments to me. My only regret is that I was not present with her. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and activate the notification bell to remain informed about more shocking real-life narratives unfolding around you.